Hello there, hockey world. It is Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025.
I'm Kevin Allen from Detroit Hockey Now.
And I am Eklund. And you're watching the Hockeybuzzcast on hockeybuzz.com. Waka waka. Um, as Fozzie Bear would say. This is the podcast that keeps you up to date on everything that's going on and tries to bring you some happiness in the middle of our crazy days. So we're going to start. I do have a theme, but we have a little bit of a breaking situation happening here. So we're going to start with a breaking situation before I get into the theme, because Jeremy Rutherford, right? I mean, we all have seen this video now. I'm sure you guys, if you haven't seen it, you haven't seen it. But he's basically in a press conference for the Canucks, and the news was supposed to be really, I think, we were more about like what's going to happen with Rick Tocchet, but it turned into this because you can't just say what he said, which he basically said. Well, Quinn Hughes has let it be known to us that he wants to play with his brothers. So, we can't really control that, except, well, we can control that maybe if we can get both of the brothers to come here. At which point he and his actual GM next to him laughed a little bit and said, "Well, I guess I shouldn't be saying that because of tampering." And Kevin, you've known him for longer than anybody that I know. He's a Detroit guy, right? He was a Red Wings goalie. What is the deal with him? Like, what do you interpret from what you heard?
Well, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I don't think it surprised anyone because, the Hughes brothers have made it clear at various times in their career that their ultimate dream would be to play together. And,
Sure. Yeah.
unlike the Sutters, where they had six brothers, which made it almost impossible for them to
Yeah.
live that dream. Three of them, seems at least, maybe not probable, but at least doable. And,
Yeah.
so I think they've always sort of had that in the back of their mind. What I don't think
Yeah.
anybody knew was coming, that it would be that soon, because I think everyone was thinking, well, they got to wait till, Quinn Hughes gets to free agency at age 27. But,
Yeah.
Jim Rutherford, and you hit the nail on the head, he's a different general manager. And, what sort of drives him is he almost has this need to be honest with people. And I
Mhm.
think that, when Quinn Hughes told him what he did, I think Jim Rutherford said, we could be headed for a situation where, like Matthew Kachuk, where we don't really have an opportunity to
Yeah. Right.
sign this player. And so, rather than sit on it and keep quiet, which I think a lot of general managers would have done, and then decide what you're going to do that way, he decided, I'm just going to be upfront about it. I'm going to
Yeah.
express, what Quinn Hughes said to me, and also, let everybody know that, now we're kind of considering our options of what we're going to do. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, you can argue that that puts them in a poor negotiation position because
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
knows that they only want to go to one team, and that would be New Jersey. But,
Yeah.
in these situations, you never get back a player. You can't get a player
Yeah.
back who's as good as Quinn Hughes. But,
Yeah.
we've seen this kind of situation before, and you do get back a reasonable,
Yeah.
return. Now, the question is, what would this do to Vancouver?
Yeah.
The rebuild, the retransformation that has been going on there hasn't really been all that effective anyway. So, but to lose a player of that magnitude, if it comes to that, I think would be very, very, very difficult. But
Yeah.
it's the last cards haven't been played. I mean, what could Vancouver do? Well, we know what they could do. They could
Yeah.
offer to make him the highest paid player in the league.
Right.
Would he turn down $15 million a year on an 8-year deal? Would he do that?
Maybe.
Uh, yeah, so maybe would. Maybe that would be a drive him. But you know, at least give Quinn Hughes credit for letting him know what he's thinking, and
Yeah.
then we'll let them decide what to do, and maybe they can talk him out of it. Maybe they
Yeah.
can do that. So it is going to be interesting now, and the one element that Jim Rutherford's candor will create is how will the fans react? you know, to
This is like a slow burn. He gets us out there now. It's like not going to be freaked out completely.
yeah. Well, I mean, they may be freaked out. I mean,
We're freaked out now, but it's not as bad as if they just would actually suddenly trade him.
yeah.
You didn't know
Well,
about
for
it.
sure. Yeah, for sure. But now what'll happen? At the start of next year, if Quinn Hughes goes 5 games without,
Right.
registering a point, then the fan base, oh, just trade him now and get it over with. He clearly doesn't want to be here. How it all sort of plays out. So that will add some pressure to Quinn Hughes until they decide how they're going to handle this. But
Yeah.
because we got a ways to go before
Yeah.
he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. So it's going to be interesting. But there's huge celebration in New Jersey already.
Yeah.
I mean, you look online and people are excited. Like, I mean, there's a feeling that Quinn can make this happen. Because if
Yeah.
you don't, what's the standard saying in the NHL when you get a player? Well, if you don't want to have a player who doesn't want to play for you.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't. And these things usually tend to work out where the player ends up going where he wants to go.
Yeah, for sure. They do end up that way, and maybe that's the way they should work
I
out.
mean,
Because
yes. I mean, should's a big word, right? But at the same time, here's the other angle of this thing. So Rutherford, as you taught me early on, and it's so true, is the best horse trader in hockey, right? Like, which means that he is the best, not just trading for draft picks or considerations or whatever. He's the best at getting current players for current players, like just
right.
making that happen. And he's really good at it. And he's made some great trades over the years with Pittsburgh. It also does show you a little bit like how much is he? He's not technically the GM of the Vancouver Canucks. Like it really feels like when he's saying that. When he's saying that he is the GM of the it really is the GM of the Vancouver Canucks. It feels like that. It always felt like that, but this kind of like that meeting, sort of him saying something like that when the GM's right there with him, is like, to me, it's like okay, but he's cutting off, and it didn't appear. This is what it appeared like to me from the GM's reaction next to him, that he had told the GM he was going to talk about this. Like I think it just came out of nowhere in a way, and I think he said. He just said in his head, like what you said, like I'm going to be honest, get this out there and see what happens. The other thing about that is him mentioning tampering, right? Which is, almost like, fine, call it tampering, call it whatever you want. but that there's an obnoxious thing about tampering that some of the old GMs have, like, oh yeah, sure, that's tampering, like it's like whatever.
Well, I mean, it's not. I mean, the Devils didn't do anything, so it can't be
Right,
tampering.
right.
They didn't, unless there's something that's gone on here.
Yeah,
But
like yeah. I
so
mean, people thought to me, okay, well, but and it also sounds like the way he says it, which is the little confusion on the Canucks side of things, because I've been following some of the Canucks fans. The way he says it is he feels like he's got a legitimate chance of getting the two Hughes there.
uh,
That's the impression I got.
well, if that's what he's angling for, then I guess then you could see that. I don't see that happening.
Yeah,
I don't see the two Hughes is going to Vancouver. There seems to me there's a far greater,
yeah,
like a 90-10 situation that
you would think so,
they,
right?
yeah, because you only got to move one player to get him to New Jersey. Plus, I just don't see the Hughes family saying, "Oh, that'd be better for our family if everybody's playing in Vancouver."
Right,
So
that's the other case, right? Like that. It really kind of Luke Hughes is a good player, but it really comes down to Jack and Quinn, for the most part. Like Luke Hughes is a solid player. He's young. He could be a very good defenseman at some point. He's not in Quinn's category or Jack's category. These are two MVP
well,
type.
I think that he's a significant part of it, though. Like
Mhm.
I mean, I know what you're saying.
No, they're going to put him in the trade, but I'm saying that.
Jack and Quinn can be A+ players, and maybe he's an A-.
Yeah,
Uh,
right. It just
so,
seems like, if it was just trying to get Luke there or just trying to get Jack there, it'd be a lot harder to get Jack there.
yeah.
But he's been hurt a lot too, so there's that factor too. And then definitely the Devils fans are getting a little bit. Now, who could make a
I
better
mean,
trade here?
the U's in general have been,
Injury prone, yeah.
yeah, for
Uh-huh.
sure. So, and they're not giant players.
Yeah.
That's
They're small, quick players. You're right.
so. I mean, it certainly is interesting, and it's what makes the NHL go round is
Yeah.
this kind of discussion of player movement.
I mean, yeah, like for me, it's like someone came and gave me a gift. Like this time of year to
Yeah,
have a rumor thing going on like this is completely not heard of. There's not right now. The playoffs are usually kind of slow rumor times. So I was on the phone last night with a lot of different people. Let's talk Tom Fitzgerald for a second. The other side of this, another GM, right? So I have my experience with him. What's your experience with him?
I mean, I think that he's thought of as a guy that's done a good job early in
Yeah.
his managerial career.
Yep.
He's a guy that sort of learned under the right people. He was in Nashville, and he I think he watched how David Poyle operated, but
Yep.
he's done a good job, I think, of bringing in some pieces there that could help, and he's shown that he
Yeah.
can make trades. He's made some trades there
Yes.
that have been pretty significant
Yeah.
in terms
Really
of
has.
improving that team.
And they've been involved in everything. You know what I mean? Like the Devils have been involved in Stamkos. They were involved in all these different things that happen. Every basically major free agent. I feel like the Devils has been used by the other team. Like it always feels like they're getting used to me. Like it feels like if we could trade Stamkos to Nashville, but Nashville's made an offer. But let's see if Jersey will make an offer. But eventually we know Stamkos wants to go to Nashville or what have you. That feels like that's happened. And because
Yeah,
I've talked to them a couple times while these things were going on, and they were like, "We got a shot," and I'm always like, "Cool, that's great, we got a shot at Stamkos, we got a shot at this," and at the end of the day, it's always they've even offered more money in some cases. I forget who the free agent was 2 years ago that this happened, but they offered more money to him, and he still went to the other place. So it was very very frustrating because they thought they were being told one thing, and in
yeah.
negotiate.
Well, in the case of Stamkos, it was the old cliche of sometimes the best deals you make are the ones you
Yeah.
don't.
I
So
know. I was actually talking to Kevin Weeks about that the other day, and because I was looking on my DMs, and he once in a while will DM me on Twitter, and the last DM I had from him was in the off season where he said, "Oh man, the Devils were so close to getting Stammer and Marchessault, like they were right there, you know." And then so I saw that, and I emailed him back. I'm like, "Well, probably wasn't a bad thing that happened, right?" He's like, "Yeah, that's what I know."
yeah,
He's,
for sure.
I mean, and that is the better case there. My history with my I've known Fitzgerald since he was in Nashville as well. Um, he's a great guy, like one of the nicest GMs I've ever met. Um, and he's definitely smart. He's really sharp. He's got a good hockey mind. Doesn't necessarily have the experience of some people yet, and I think sometimes that plays against him. I think sometimes he can be a little too trusting, maybe, of people. But that's something he admits. I think that's something that he's got to be like. There's a difference between like Rutherford's from like the Brian Burke mold. Like he's not gonna you're not gonna get one over on him, and he's gonna try to get one over on you, kind of. So
Yeah.
that's me, and that's what a good GM usually should do. But in the NHL, we know sometimes that GMs are. There's also a code of like, I know, for example, Bill Zito doesn't like to make a trade that screws the other team completely because he feels like that's bad for the league. So he wants to make sure that it's somewhat fair, which is one of the reasons I think the Flyers got a first-round draft pick in the Claude Giroux trade. They got Tippett and a first-round draft pick, and I don't think they needed to give up the first-round draft pick in that trade. And he never said that to me, but I believe that that's kind of his mentality is like, that was kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah. It's interesting you brought that up because I
Mhm.
think, back in the 1980s, in sort of the Glenn Sather era of,
Yeah.
kind of running the Edmonton Oilers, like Sather made deals where, he wanted to be immediately crowned as the champion of the deal. Like,
Hmm.
his idea is to make the kind of deal that people were saying, like, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
And that was the kind of the way they did it back then. You wanted to win the deal. It was like it was a competitive thing, and then you kind of moved into the '90s, and Brian Burke was among the first who, he went out of his way to always say what a good deal the other team made as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was fair. Like, and he felt, you in order to make deals with people, you can't try to hammer them because you want them to come back and make deals with you again. So, he would actually kind of say to them, and it's a lawyer trick too. A lot of lawyers
Yeah.
will, tell the other, side, even if they sort of win the deal. Wow, man, you
All
didn't
right.
have you didn't have the facts on your side, and yet you still, got a lot out of this. You really did a great job on this case, and
Yeah, that
I,
is some.
I
It's. I know
yeah,
it really is a trick. It is like I don't know if it's like you just don't want to feel like you're a dirtbag, or if it's like like a lawyer could be, or something like that. You just want to you want your reputation to be strong. Or you just want there to be no problems in the future. So the person thinks that they did the right thing and doesn't question that they were just taken.
right.
There's a bunch of different things there. Like I think that play into that for sure. Now a trade in this situation, if in my opinion, if you're going to go after Quinn Hughes, you would think that Jasper Bratt would have to be a big part. That would have to be a part of that. Like to me, he's the most talented forward the Devils have beyond Jack Hughes, and he's shown a lot. And
And I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, Quinn, if you're going to take Vancouver's best player,
yeah,
or the player who creates the greatest impact, the biggest difference maker, the flag carrier, then you've got to give them a wow factor back. And I
yeah,
agree with you that Brett would be, the guy that would do that. The only argument would be, would the Devils say, look, we need
yeah,
Brett
yeah,
in order to be, if you take him from us, the getting Quinn doesn't help us nearly as much.
right,
Um, so I'm sure they'll try to steer that in a different direction. You know, this is going to be, if I had to guess what's going to happen, they're going to end up getting a really good player, but it may not be Brad.
yeah.
Um, and then they're going to get multiple first round picks.
That
That's
I
what.
buy too. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with that.
Now it'll be interesting because Jim Rutherford, he's a guy that understands that those first round picks, aren't as good as, people think they are. Unless you're picking, in the top 3 or 4 picks, you're not guaranteed to get a significant player. You
Yeah,
gotta, I don't think it's his intention for the Vancouver Canucks to be non-competitive
no, for
for
sure.
a while. So, he'll probably push for more, credible players. But
Yeah,
would you wonder whether the return would be more players like Mercer or um, uh,
Hamilton.
yeah, oh yeah, or maybe Hamilton. I mean, Hamilton, that would make sense because they're going to want a defenseman back as
Right.
well. So I don't even know. I haven't even looked at what's Dougie Hamilton's.
He's got
Uh,
to. I'll look it up. But Hamilton, is somebody that I think they would be willing to move.
well, but does
Um,
he have a no trade clause?
he probably does. He
That
probably
would be
he
my
probably does.
guess.
But then that can be iffy. But also, as you know, just like for the same thing, like you said, and the player doesn't want to be there. You don't want to have him anymore. The same thing kind of goes in. With the no trade clauses. Like if a team doesn't want me, whatever. I might.
Yeah, but that's a little bit different because it's one team. Like
Yeah.
that that could make a player mad to the point where he could veto a
Yes.
trade. I mean, we've certainly seen that
Yes.
happen. So
I agree with that completely. That's a very good point. We've definitely seen that happen. I'm getting his numbers up. If someone in the chat room wants to do that for us, that'd be great too. But because it's just Kevin and I today, so find out. Someone in the chat room, tell me how much money Hamilton's making and how long he's making for. I appreciate it. Um, I think it's around 7. I want to say,
I I think it's more.
is it more?
Yeah.
But it's for a long time still, right? I know that
Yeah.
too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're going to have to trade money in the Quinn Hughes trade. Like Devils are going to have to trade money away.
Yeah, for sure. So that's why a Hamilton,
Yeah,
would work more.
yeah,
Or you know.
yeah.
So
If it went the other way, because the people in Vancouver still think it could. What does Vancouver have to give up for Quinn and Hugh, for Jack and Luke?
well, we know the center
Yeah,
they would want to give up.
yeah,
But I don't know, why the Devils would want to do that. I mean, they would have to replace Hughes, but to take, you know, I mean, there's no comparison between Pedersen and Jack Hughes. So,
This is
Yeah.
why I love the chat room. They've got answers for us right away. It's a thank you, Esmer, and thank you, Halfdan. Sorry, Janssen. Nice Swedish name there. Sorry if I pronounced it wrong. He's making three more years at $9 million per year.
Yeah.
And he's got a 10 team trade list.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So that could be very, very difficult because I think there's a decent chance that Vancouver would be on that, but maybe not. I mean, Vancouver's a nice city,
Yeah.
and a lot of players think, well, that'd be great um,
Yeah.
to go there. But now's not the time. I mean, you want to be in a competitive environment. I'm sure Dougie Hamilton doesn't want to go to a team that, if you take Quinn Hughes out of Vancouver. And you had Dougie Hamilton back, or where are they at? I
Well,
mean,
he's
they
going to a place where he knows he's going to be the number one defenseman, right? That's a good thing.
well, he already is.
He already is, but
Yeah.
he's Canadian, right? He's Canadian, isn't he?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
I don't know where he's from. Chat room, but anyway, but yeah, I mean, people from British Columbia want to go there, but
for sure. Well, I think a lot of people do, but they're just
yeah,
not. You don't say Vancouver, boy, they got a chance to win the cup in the next couple or 3 years.
exactly.
So that's
Steve, thank you in the chat room. Hamilton is from Toronto,
yeah,
or as I'm supposed to say, Toronto.
yeah.
So yeah, that's yeah, okay, so that's a different story. Because people from Toronto and people from British Columbia are very different. It's always interesting. Like the people don't know how people always think of Canadians as one thing, but there's definitely like at least 4 different, or I would say 5 different kinds of Canadians. Here's my theory. Ready? The Western Coast has got like kind of a lot like the Western Coast of the United States. It's kind of, there's a laid back thing to it. It's very they're very nature conscious because they've got all these beautiful nature things around them. Then the Calgary, Edmonton area is a lot like Denver, like the Colorado area. It's very much like, cowboy town and mountains, right?
Yeah, Alberta is very, very conservative too.
Very conservative too, yeah. So maybe like a lot of Wyoming, we'll say, which is very conservative. And then you've got the Winnipeg area, which is kind of like where Saskatchewan is too, and that's like the plains of the United States, right? That's like the Kansas, Nebraska type area to me. And then you've got Toronto, which is the New York of Canada. So you have that, like that's like the metropolitan area, that the suburbs around there are like New Jersey and Connecticut. Then French Canada, of course, is another thing, and then Newfoundland and all that are totally another thing. so yeah,
and Quebec is unique.
it is.
It
really is. Quebec and Montreal are very different from each other too, but they definitely have their own thing. So players you can always tell where a player wants to go because they might, that is a cultural thing to a degree for them sometimes. Like we're talking about Jonathan Toews maybe coming back and then playing for Winnipeg, which people are like, oh, no one wants to play for Winnipeg. Well, Jonathan Toews would want to play for Winnipeg because he's from Winnipeg.
Well, we don't know that, but
yeah,
you would think so. Yeah,
that's the assumption. That's true. We don't know. Right about that.
The one thing about it is, but he hasn't been back there in a long time, right? He's been living in Chicago, but what the added lure now of Winnipeg is they're a good team.
They're a good team.
Yeah, so he's a hometown boy, and they're a good team. So maybe
I will argue with you with a little bit on how I think of Vancouver as a better team than you do. And the reason I say that is because they were in it for a long time. They have talent. They had a lot of turmoil this year, and yet they still managed to stay close.
Close isn't good enough, though.
I know, but they didn't have a goalie for most of the year. And it's like, to me, there's certain things that, if they get a goalie, like if they had Markstrom back or something like that, that would be a very different look for them because they need, Demko is a great goalie, but he's just never healthy. So, but that team, I think, is better than you're saying they are.
Well, but when you take Quinn Hughes out of it,
that's true. That's true.
I mean, that's the one I'm talking about. Like you're
right.
They're okay, but they weren't a playoff team this year, and now you're talking about taking Quinn Hughes out of it. So that's a tough. I mean, just take the best player out of any NHL team, and they're simply not as good as they were, before. Now,
for sure.
Now the argument is well they're going to get something back, but you're not going to get Quinn Hughes back. So um, he's just he's a unique player. There's no doubt about it.
He is a very unique player. He's he's the prototypical, like we've talked about before. Like every team's like, well, we need a Quinn Hughes on our team. He's become a noun, like he's become, or an adjective. He's like, we need a Quinn Hughes type player. We got news, and thanks to the chat room, thank you for bringing this up, that Lou Lamoriello will not renew his contract as general manager of the New York Islanders.
Wow.
So let's make this a GM show, Kev.
Well, and I mean, can we be surprised? He's in his 80s.
Yeah.
So I mean that makes sense. I mean, the question I immediately would ask is, was this by mutual agreement, or how did this come to pass? I mean, you hope it was Lou making the decision.
Well, there's a statement on Lou Lamoriello coming. I'm going to try to see if I know what this is. So I understand. I might not. Okay, so here's the New York Islanders organization. This is from the Islanders. Announced today that Lou Lamoriello's contract as president and general manager will not be renewed. Well, that sounds like he's not maybe deciding on his own.
Right, he's deciding on his own. Yeah. Okay.
Which is effective immediately. Operating partner John Collins will lead a search to find the next general manager. The Islanders extend a heartfelt thank you to Lou Lamoriello for his extraordinary commitment over the past 7 years. His dedication to the team is in line with his Hall of Fame career. Yes, I'm not. I am. When you said you're not surprised, I was surprised that he was stepping on his own. The reason I said that is because he's the kind of deals he's made, and Islanders fans hate this, but the kind of deals he's made has been very much to win now the entire time he's been there, which means that he, like he is not. I mean, he's extended guys that people no other team would have extended, with the money that he gave them. Just because he believes in culture and he believes in. But they got old real fast, They were.
Well, I was just going to say too, and his legacy is not going to be, quite what the general perception of Lou in the fan base.
Yeah.
I think people that are general hockey fans see him as kind of a guy who was a real hard liner that was difficult to deal with. But players really did like him. He was a guy that constantly was talking to the players. I just some stories I remember being told. Ken Danikel told me that when everybody was talking about the negotiation, how it was going to go for Ken Danikel, one time Lou just walked up to him and just had a little sheet of paper, a little almost like it wasn't a Post-it, but it was a Post-it sized piece of paper, and he goes,
slide across the table kind of thing.
Yeah, it's this number. Just handed it to him, and Dan said, "Yeah, that'll work." And Marty Brodeur has talked about how the negotiations went with Lou, and just that he's just honest and so forth. And I remember Zach Parise, telling the story when he left New Jersey to sign with Minnesota. How hard it was to tell Lou that he was going to do it, and thought Lou would give him a hard time, and he told him, "I'm going home because I wanted to, my dad, who I don't believe was doing all that well then, but maybe
I remember that too.
Yeah, but he wanted to go home, so he'd be closer to home, and his dad could watch him play. J.P. Parise, of course, was a NHL player as well, and Lou said, "Yeah, Zach, I understand. I mean, if it was a money thing, I would try to talk you out of it and see what you could work out. But you're telling me you want to go home. I respect that. So and that's kind of how he was, and I love that he was a guy that, much like Jim Rutherford, he was a good trader. Like he was almost like clockwork. He would assess his team in October, November, and December, and then he would make a trade either early January in there that he would try to address what he considered to be his best need. And he had a good knack of bringing in coaches that worked well. I think about Jacques Lemaire and Larry Robinson, Pat Burns. He was a guy that liked to get name guys, and he'd gone behind the bench himself when things weren't going well. so he could have a better handle on what kind of coach the team,
Yeah.
needed. And he hired a full-time coach. So, he's certainly going to go down as one of the, top general managers in
Yeah, it's
NHL
really like
history.
he's one of the most unique people in the sport, and just like I've got some great Lou Lamoriello stories that I can share, some that I can't, but yeah, I'm sure you do too. But yeah, he kind of had that. I always looking around, like I said, like, when you talk to him, which was rare because he doesn't really, you might get a chance to talk to him a little bit, but for media, he doesn't tell anybody anything. He doesn't even tell the people. And the old joke was that if he saw a rumor about something that he was doing, that he told the other team, I won't make the trade if I see it come out beforehand. I don't know if that was really true, but that was always the thing.
Well, I mean, it was true that he would always caution the other team from,
Yeah.
spreading rumors. That he
Yeah.
did uh, enjoy that. I think that was true. That was just not the way he operated. He liked to operate covertly,
Yeah.
and he didn't like his business, being transacted in.
It sounds mob like, doesn't it? It's like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does. When I said it, that made me laugh. But yeah,
part of the business here. Come on, get the business going.
yeah, he just, that's just not the way he wanted to do things. I've known him for a long time, and
Yeah.
he's always addressed the fact that he and I sort of entered the league together.
Okay.
I became the national writer for USA Today in like his first season,
Okay.
and so he always would talk about, yeah, you and I came in together,
Yeah.
so and.
That's good.
I found him, like, he's not a guy that would give me a lot of scoops, but he always would talk to me,
Yeah.
because I had been around for a long
Yeah.
time. He kind of said, the game. I don't mind sort of talking to you. You know how it all works, and so he would always give me time when I needed it.
Yeah.
And I
He's
always appreciated that.
he is like that. He has that dichotomy going on of like the tough guy image, but a really sweetheart at the bottom of it all. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
like his love of baseball. When you hear him talk about baseball, it's like a different person. Like
Yeah,
he loves baseball so much, and he just you don't hear any of this stuff. Kind of like when you talk about football, you get to be like a fan, and he's a fan,
right.
and he's like that's the thing, right? So I love that about him. I always thought he would hate what I did because of what basically what when you think about it, like I'm a rumor monger, and he hates rumors. So, but I was told very very early on in my career, by an agent at the time that Lou passed the message through to me, um, and says. And says, yeah, the agent said to me, yeah, the big guy reads your stuff. And I'm like, what the big guy? Yeah, Lou Lamoriello. He reads your stuff. He says he likes it, but don't write about him. That's the message I got from the agent.
Yeah, that sounds. Lou, I want you writing about him for
Yeah, that was
sure.
the funniest thing. But what I loved about him, and one other experience I had with him, which I always thought was hilarious, was and then we'll talk about some of the good things too that he did. But it was the Devils Island. The Devils were playing the Kings in the finals, and it was media day. And I'm walking around, and so Lou's at a table, which he loves, and people are coming up to him and talking to him, and also the GM from the Kings, from oh gosh, what's his name? Dean Lombardi. So Dean Lombardi is at another table, and I knew Dean Lombardi always kind of saw like Lou as like a mentor to him, because I'd heard that from many people. So I went to Lombardi, and I'm like, I'll write a story about that. So I said to Dean, so what's it like? He's like, oh yeah, you wouldn't believe this, but like when I was one time, I was trying to get into this business, and Lou brought me in and let me like hang around with the team for a couple of days and go through what he went through and show me all the different ropes, but I was just trying to be a general manager so I could see what it was like. So I thought that's a great story. That's a cool, good luck, good feeling story. So I go back to Lou and I say, Lou, I was just talking to Dean, and can you explain to me what it was like to like give him show him the ropes and stuff like that and show him around your team? And he said, that never happened. Who told you that? I'm like, well, Dean did. He's like, no, that never happened. And that was it.
Yeah.
It was just like, okay, what can
There's not much you can say at that
no, you're like,
point.
okay, I'm a reporter. I'm not like I can't read minds. I'm just going to say, okay, so if you say it never happened and he said it did happen, I'm going to say it never happened because that's what you have to do. So I guess it
Well,
never happened. But what Dean talked about, it was such like glowing like respect for him. Um,
Yeah.
so good
Yeah.
stories. Also, I
Well,
think you told me about the Niedermeyer story, the Scott Niedermeyer story with him too, which I think is a good one.
my favorite story though is,
Okay.
someone who he does admit mentoring, and he played for him in
Mhm.
college, and that's Brian Burke.
Right.
And Brian Burke always told the story that Lou Lamoriello suspended him from the team when he was a senior, and his crime was that he took three freshmen to midnight mass, and he broke curfew. And he didn't suspend him. He brought him in the middle of the night and skated them,
Mhm.
for like, a couple hours. That's what it was. And um, you know Lou basically said, that hopefully you'll never do this again. And the other story he told me is that, um, Brian Burke was going to turn pro, um, and um, or no, what it was is that he decided I think Lou wanted or his parents wanted him to take the LSAT. That's what it was. And
Okay.
and then Brian Burke told Lou, "Yeah, I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to turn pro and all that." And he said, and Lou said, "No, you don't understand. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm telling you to go. No,
Right.
you're going to take the LSAT because your parents want you to do that, and
Yeah.
you don't know whether you're going to be a hockey player. And of course, for those of you who don't know that, Brian Burke did play one season in the AHL for the
Right.
Philadelphia Flyers organization, but then ended up in Harvard Law School.
Right.
So it was really a good decision. But
That's funny.
Lou Lamoriello, Brian Burke always used him as a sounding board early in
Yeah.
his career, to be sure. And
Yeah.
uh, but for a guy that has now worked well into his 80s, Lou never, he certainly didn't act 80ish.
No.
He
No.
had a lot of energy. He was a guy that worked around the clock and so forth.
Yeah.
And yeah, the Islanders have had trouble in the last few years, but it wasn't that Lamoriello wasn't pulling all the levers and doing what he could. It's a tough league now. 32 teams, only 16 make the playoffs.
Yeah.
You know, it's not easy.
Different world. And I remember so when Scott Niedermayer came in, right, and like you had told me, and I heard from other people, like he wanted to play with Rob. He went in Anaheim, right? So Lou said, like you said, the same kind of thing. Like Scott was probably very nervous to go into him, talk to him, and Lou was like, "Fine, that you've done a lot for this organization.
Right.
Absolutely, go and play with your brother. I get that, and it's like the soft side of him. But the hard side of him on the same story, it's like an adjunct to that story, is the next season in preseason. I'm watching the Devils come into Philadelphia, and they're skating their ice, and there's somebody wearing his number, wearing 20's number 27. like literally,
Yeah.
he had just left this organization. Any other team would never have given that number out. They're going to retire that number eventually for sure. But that's Lou. Like he's like, yeah, he's not here anymore. You can wear number 27. I mean, the player who took it had some guts, but I would have said that was something else. That was him. And the final thing about him I'll say is this: is I personally, he never gave any information to any of us, right? So we never had any scoops on him ever. But he had this crazy. What I loved about him is figuring out, like being like a Lou. I tried to be like a Lou Lamoriello whisperer, because he was very consistent in what he does. So there was, what I mean. There was a thing that what Lou would do in this situation. You could try to connect the dots, and put together your own things. You might be wrong, but he was really interesting because he was so consistent with his actions. Didn't you find the same thing?
I think for sure. I mean, you knew when he was going to make a deal,
Yeah.
and you could sort of figure out what he'd be looking for. But I did say for years, and I really meant it, and I never saw any evidence that I was wrong on that. Any rumor that you heard, if you heard a rumor about what Emerald was doing, it wasn't true.
It wasn't true, right?
Yeah, because he wouldn't. He was just so careful, and what he wanted to do. And usually it's the same thing now with Steve Eiserman. I can rattle off the six major
Yeah.
trades that Eisenman has made, and none of them had even a word about it before it happened.
It's going nowhere.
Eichmann is very, similar in a way, but I know what you're saying. You
Yeah.
know, as I mentioned before, he did make a lot of trades early in January after assessing his team.
Yep.
You knew what kind of players that he liked, so you could sort of speculate on who he might be interested in the trade
Yeah.
market.
He also
So
mentored Bill Zito too, to the point where I was when I first met Bill Zito and I was over his place for dinner. So Bill Zito has twins, had twin daughters, and there were two jerseys hanging up on the wall that were encased in glass. That were Devils jerseys with his daughters' names on them, names across the back, and the number one and number two that Lou
hmm,
had sent them. That Lou
that's
had
great.
sent to him. That's just like that's like the kind of thing that's what he thought of him, and that was like something that was really impressive. And this is when Bill was, I believe, still an agent even, and which is kind of crazy. I don't even think he was a GM at that point. So yeah, that that's the story. We have a couple of questions in the chat room before we get out of here. So we didn't talk about the games last night. Of course, we aren't going to generally review the games, but we can talk about aspects of them for sure. The one question I saw was there were great games last night. First of all, the one question I saw was, would you go with Calvin Pickard if you were the Edmonton Oilers next? And I'd say yes.
Yeah, yeah, I would too. Yeah, yeah. I'm not big on giving up on proven goalies, but they don't have one.
Yeah, right. And he's been, but I think he's more consistent a little
Yeah,
bit. Like you're not going to get you might occasionally get the bigger save from Skinner, but I don't think but you're not going to get the bad goals as much from Pickard. I think so. I would stay with that. That game was so interesting last night, though. For a second, I do it like because LA is Edmonton has only scored one goal on LA in the last three games they played. The last three games they played, Edmonton had one goal on them, which was so they had shut them out. They'd been shut out twice by LA, and last night it looked like it was heading there again. It really there was first two periods nothing, right? So yeah, I
yeah,
thought that was something really really interesting to me. I feel like the Oilers lost that game last night, but in a way they won it a little bit because breaking through and having their stars get on track. Like if they had lost that game 4-0 or 5-1, that would have been way worse than what they saw than what happened because they actually broke through something.
yeah. I thought last night's game, like the Oilers essentially played with five defensemen.
Yeah,
Another number six defenseman, Joshua Brown, played less than 5 minutes.
yeah,
And their number four, Wallman, played 19 and change
right,
last night, and Hart didn't have any power play time, didn't have
yeah,
any shorthanded, they didn't use them on shorthanded
right,
situations. And I don't know. That's a hard way to win a playoff game. Playing with five
really,
defensemen.
really,
So I just think here we are again. Game one in the postseason,
yeah,
and how many years have we talked about the defense?
yeah, and the goaltender.
They were fortunate really to get Wallman back because he had missed the last five
Yeah,
games of
no,
the
that was
regular
something,
season.
and I mean, and it's just amazing what McDavid and Draisaitl can do when they really are on top of it. Like they really decided to take that game
Yeah.
over. You know,
Well, and LA's a good defensive team,
they
man.
are. They're a really good defensive team, and they're good at home. And we almost had like the reversal of the miracle in Manchester last night, which would have been fun. But four goals. It's only twice I think they said that somebody come from 4-1 to win a playoff game, and one was the miracle of Manchester, and one was another game. But yeah, that's which seems like crazy that it's only happened a couple times, but it almost happened last night. Okay, here we go. Another okay. So yes, our Islanders guy, who's our Devils guy. Sorry, our Red Wings guy who's always in the room with us, has a question. That Larkin, he said Larkin sounded off. Anything to worry about?
Um, Not really. I mean, Larkin took a shot from McClellan about, if you remember,
Yeah,
he didn't think Larkin was going very well, and he had had a few bad games. And McClellan and Larkin, when we asked him about him, to his credit, said he's right. I haven't been playing well. I would like to step up, but I think all of a sudden Larkin said, if they're going to take shots at me, I'm going to say what I think. And basically what he said was, why didn't Eiserman make any deals?
yeah,
And I thought it was maybe just a little bit insulting for, Mrazek, because he
Yeah.
basically said, we didn't really get any help. Which I would agree with, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
They didn't.
Yeah.
Mrazek was not going to be a big help to them. So I mean, but the one thing is that we should remember about the Larkin Eisenman relationship, and this is what none of us had that missed when we were thinking, when this Larkin negotiation for their contract dragged out forever. We're thinking, oh, this is not going to be good. Larkin's going to be, even after he signs the contract, he's going to be ticked, because he essentially ended up getting what we all thought he was going to get. You know, in the 8-7 range.
Yeah.
That's where he slotted in with all the people that had been signed. We
Yeah.
thought he'd be ticked, but what we didn't know until after is that Larkin would pop into his office, and he and Eiserman were talking all the time,
Okay.
and Eiserman was constantly telling him, why he was trying to hold the line on it and everything else. And in
Yeah.
the end, Eiserman gave in more than he wanted to.
Yeah.
Larkin didn't push for that, so I think they have a good relationship.
Okay.
And I think Eiserman's totally fine with Larkin saying, I expected him to do more.
Right.
And there's, I don't think, I mean, there's a lot of fan angst in Detroit about what happened, missing the
Sure.
playoffs yet again, ninth consecutive season. But I
Yeah.
think, on the team, there's a kind of thought is, had Eisman pulled the trigger early on a coaching change, they might have made the playoffs, because if you take the number of points per game that they earned under McClellan, it would have gotten them into the playoffs if it was projected over 82 games. I think,
Yeah.
their scoring rate, scoring in terms of points earned per game, would have put them at like 95 points. So I
Yeah.
think they think they'll be, better, and they're excited about a good young defenseman who has been considered to be their Quinn Hughes type
Yeah.
defenseman, and Axel Sandin Pelika, who may not be ready at the start of the year, but should be up at some point,
Yeah.
next year. And I think they're going to go out. They got $22 million to spend. I think they're going to go out and bid on somebody,
Yeah.
and try to make a run, because they have five guys to hold the six spots in their top six forwards. Like,
Right.
they don't really have anybody to play with Larkin and Raymond. DeBrincat, Kane, and Marco Casper make a pretty good second line. They got to re-sign Kane, but it sounds like he wants to do there. So I think that even though Larkin, sounded off a little bit, it wasn't quite as dramatic either as people
Yeah.
made it out to be. He was just, saying what he felt, that, he wished they would have done more. That's
Yeah.
all I'm saying.
Chat room, Steve asked about players they might get. Gavrikov and Besser. He's two players they might go after.
Gavrikov would be a good fit, people think, for Sider, and Besser. I think is the thing. They want to get someone who can score 30 goals. Like,
Yeah.
like you imagine Besser fitting with Raymond and Larkin.
Yeah.
Um, I think Marner would be too much, for them. But I think Besser, could be a good fit. And then, another guy, if depending on how much money they have, like maybe they could make a deal with Pittsburgh over Brian Rust, as well, because they got to get some other. And another big question for them was, what are they going to do about Tarasenko, who
Yeah.
just didn't fit? Only got 11 goals.
He's a weird
Um,
bird.
yeah,
I've talked about him.
didn't really play all that well. They won't be able to trade him for 4.75 million. So I think the fans would love for him to buy him out, but it would still cost them, $1.6 million for 2 years. And
Yeah.
what I tell Red Wing fans is, if you want to understand that, that buyouts are not get out of jail free cards, that
Yeah.
there's pain involved, just
Yes.
realize that next year the Red Wings will still make another salary cap payment on the Justin Abdicator. But yeah, he hasn't played in Detroit since 2019-20. And they are still, paying off that buyout.
Oh
So
yeah. And Rick DiPietro is still getting paid till 29.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that's not understandable. Yeah, so
I know it's insane. The last question. And this is a good one because I'm not sure. I kind of know what I think, but I want to hear what you think first. When is Landeskog going to play in the play?
yeah, um, if he may not play next game. I'm wondering if if they win next game, I think they'll just give them more time.
Yeah, me too.
But if they fall behind, I think they got to try to bring them in and see what happens. And plus, you got to just throw them into the fire. But I keep reminding people, it's been 2022 since.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been
He's
a
a
long
fourth liner.
time.
He's going to be a fourth line player. Like there's no question about that, right?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, and someone else brought up this thing, and they evaluate Vander Kane playing in game 2. I was really weird. It was really weird. I was watching Talking Night in Canada last night, and they were talking about this as if Elliot Friedman came on and said, "Listen, the NHL gave a lot of," and he's usually right? The NHL gave a lot of teams a lot of hell about players that were on their injured reserve list and why they were really out and why they could suddenly play in the game 1. So the NHL was actually telling that to teams, right? And Evander Kane was one of those guys that they kept saying. So he's like, he doesn't think they're playing. He thought Evander Kane didn't play last night so that they could say the NHL, see, he wasn't quite ready yet, and they would play him tonight. However, my sources and Elliott's probably right about all that, but he did say it was speculation, I heard that the Oilers were mad at Evander Kane because they wanted him to basically do that, to basically stay out for the season, so that they could make a draft, so they could make a trade, but they weren't able to make a trade because they were not sure that he would stay out for the season. So I don't know, but that's another thing I heard too, that they were upset about the fact that he wouldn't go on the list. I mean, because they thought he wasn't going to be ready in time for the playoffs, and he kept saying I might be.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a question.
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, I think it's a little more complicated than they were saying last night on Hockey Night in Canada, but I think that Elliott's probably right. I know that I'm glad to hear the NHL is giving teams hell about that, because I think that is important to do. I think that,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the issue of long-term injured reserve is going to get addressed in the next collective bargaining. I'm sure they're talking about that, and it's not an easy thing for the players, because players get frustrated by it too. They feel like teams have a competitive advantage. However, it creates more buying power in the marketplace.
Oh, it definitely keeps everything interesting. Keeps the trade deadline interesting, which is something.
Yeah, well, and it allows them to, to do things to pay players more money. It's, I mean, it's a complicated issue, but I think the league really feels like they need to do something.
Yeah, they do, and they've had to for years. But every time I ask like a GM who's going to or anybody who goes to the Board of Governors meetings, I say, was it discussed? And they said, "Hey, we're going to discuss it," but then they all decide, well, no, that's all right. I think they like it. I think it's something that the owners and the GMs kind of like. It is.
Well, they like it when they do it. They just don't like it when
right. That's the reality, right? There you have it. So, as Lou would say, take the job, leave the cannoli. We're out of here. Remember, folks, without the buzz, it is just hockey. Enjoy Tampa, Florida starts tonight. So that'll be a good one. I can't wait to see what happens. Will Matthew Tkachuk be okay? Speaking of LTIR, talk to you guys. Talk to y'all.